Hello, everybody. It is my pleasure to introduce you to Chris Freeman. He's Vice President of Advancement at Mystic Seaport, and he's going to fill us in on the plans for the small craft collection in the Watercraft Hall. Take it away, Chris.
Well, hey, Andy, thanks so much, and good evening, everybody. Thanks for hopping on the call tonight. I think what I need to say first is that I'm not here to try to school you all on the collection or on traditional small craft, because I'm certain you all have deeper knowledge than I do. But what I am hoping to do is share with you some of our visions and plans for the collection and for the future. I think that you probably all are aware we have about 550 vessels in the collection, but largely hidden from view over in the Rossi Mill. And I guess I should have said at the outset as well, if you want to put a question in chat, I can try to answer on the fly. If it gets too fast and furious, maybe we'll hold to the end. I'll try to finish up in time to give some time for Q&A or discussion. So 550 vessels in the collection, each containing a story. 200 years of American history, largely hidden from view. We've been collecting now for over, well, just about 94 years, I guess. Our first vessel came to the museum 1 year after we were founded in 1929. That's the Sandbagger Annie. And up to this point, we have displayed small boats on the museum side of the street, the active public side of the street, largely in the small boat exhibit. And then, of course, down at the boat livery, which you're probably all familiar with. And there are some really lovely vessels on display, not the least of which is the Great Alarian. But perhaps an underwhelming look at the diversity, depth, and breadth of the collection that we have here at the museum. Engaging for visitors, but maybe time for a change. I don't know how many of you have been across to the Rossi Mill to look at what we consider the reserve collection of small boats. If you have, then a scene like this is familiar. Lots of boats up on racks, largely by invitation only, with the exception of a few special weekends like Wooden Boat Show and Antique and Classic Boat Rendezvous, and when you all have done your traditional small craft events and activities here at Mystic Seaport. And what has been our experience is often in a small group of 6 or 8 or 10, you have a few people who are totally fascinated by the possibility of seeing all these really great small boats because they're small boat people. Then you have another group of people who are perhaps a little less passionate, a little more disinterested. But when we get them into the collection and we start poking around and we start looking at what's there, especially as we start talking about the boats and more importantly, the stories about the people behind the boats, we can almost always find something of interest, something to pique an individual's interest. So what we've been thinking about is how do we bring these boats forward and what might that look like in the future? And so we've been started out just kind of noodling around, showing some different dramatic lighting in the reserve collections in the Rossi Mill. And you can see how much more evocative these boats come, the more attention you lavish on them. Yes, in some cases, the seams show, and the use and the age and the wear show, but they become quite much more dramatic. And so through that experience, we then thought, well, heck, what if we did a couple of proof of concept exhibits? We have this beautiful new exhibition building, the Thompson Exhibition Gallery at the north end of our campus. It has within it a 5,000 square foot exhibition space. A beautiful, if you haven't seen it, a beautiful kind of clear span, open room in which we can display large objects and large artifacts. We've been able to configure this room in a variety of ways for various different exhibits. And we've experimented by putting some of these really wonderful vessels out on public display. Here's a great Chris Craft. And here is a relatively recent acquisition, a 1960s vintage Donzi race boat. And this is the Herreshoff Amphikraft, all in the lobby. And also kind of noodling around with putting some boats on display to attract the public into the space. One of the first exhibitions we did was an exhibition called Streamlined. And Streamlined was really focused on the intersection of aeronautics and hydrodynamics. And what we were really exploring is the design impetus in sort of the great age of the space race, and it resulted in all sorts of interesting design elements. But the point being, we used that exhibit to bring some of our reserve collections, engines and boats, forward. So here's kind of what the engines look like in the Rossi Mill in deep storage, and here's what they look like when presented publicly and on display. Again, this particular vessel, noteworthy because of its design and shape. And in fact, we had a guest curator from Rhode Island School of Design who came down and saw this vessel and really felt that it was a national treasure, that it really was a very early exploration of the intersection between aeronautics and aviation and naval architecture and hydrodynamics. And again, it looks kind of cool when it's in the mill lit, but it looks even better when it's on display and interpreted. And of course, the whole point of this is bringing these vessels forward to share their stories, to try to inspire next generations to be interested in the thing that we're all so passionate about, which is boats and boating and being on the water. And so here are just a few more exhibits from that particular exhibition, again, showing different ways of mounting, displaying. In the far right is the Hickman Sea Sled. The Hickman Sea Sled is a boat that was built here locally, designed by Albert Hickman, sort of unique, and it has that concave hull shape. His vision, his sort of invention was creating the opportunity to kind of force air underneath the hull, generate lift, break surface tension, provide greater speed, greater maneuverability. In fact, it was such a popular design that he became one of the most prolific recreational boat manufacturers in the country. And a young Ray Hunt sought him out when the original idea for the Boston Whaler was being developed, because they wanted to try to license the idea. And despite many efforts, Albert Hickman declined to partner with them. So Ray Hunt went off and basically tweaked it and came up with what was the 13-foot Boston Whaler with they call it the cathedral hull, but essentially two concave sections. So put a sponson in the middle, and of course went on to great success. So then the next exhibit we did was actually a boat called Storyboats, The Tales They Tell. And again, based on some of the work we'd done, bringing people through the collection, talking to people about the vessels, revealing to them, beyond just the interesting object and the utilitarian purpose, the stories behind the boats, the people who built them, designed them, used them. We thought, let's put on a show called Storyboats as proof of concept, because we began to have a real strong desire to develop an exhibition space where we could really bring more of these boats out and share them with the public. And so Storyboats began. Right in the opening foyer was the Boston Whaler. We found one of the original Boston Whalers that had been cut in half for the advertising campaign. And so that is now accessioned into our collection. And you can see suspended from the ceiling there. And then underneath it, a rather unremarkable Boston Whaler, a Nauset 17. And it's fairly typical and in good condition, and as I say, unremarkable, until you let people know that it was actually owned by John Steinbeck. And it gives us the opportunity to talk about Steinbeck and his writing and his interest in the sea and in the ocean. And again, as soon as you say that, all of a sudden you've captured people's attention. Similarly, the Patsy Green here, which is a decked canoe, sailing canoe. It's in not the best state or condition of repair. But the thing that's fascinating about this is that a husband and wife team in the early part of the 20th century paddled this canoe 900 miles from Manhattan up into the Canadian Maritimes and camped ashore and paddled hard every day. And it's, I think, just a remarkable story of adventure and perseverance, if not a remarkable story about marital fidelity. I understand they survived the trip with the marriage intact and went on to have other great adventures. Similarly, this vessel, Ana Luisa, it's actually one of the few vessels in the collection that's not American built. This is a vessel that was built, you can kind of see the tail end of Mariel on this transom, which is the hailing port. And Ana Luisa was actually built in Cuba, was used as a fishing boat. But then, again, the sort of unremarkable until you hear the story about two different families that immigrated to the United States aboard Ana Luisa. The first group of 19, an extended family, got most of the way across the strait. The engine died. They were rescued by a Carnival cruise ship, but the boat was abandoned. Not long after, a second family whose vessel was sinking came upon Ana Luisa. They were able to get in the boat, get the engine started again, and actually make it to the coast of Florida. The Coast Guard ultimately took possession of the vessel and donated it here to Mystic Seaport, but they took the prop off. I think they took the prop off because they were worried maybe we'd put it back in the water and somebody else would use it to emigrate to America. I don't know. But anyways, it was really fun to have that vessel here, and we had it on display once before and actually invited family members to come share their story with museum visitors and talk about becoming American citizens, raising their families here, going to college here. And it just was really so stirring and so illuminating, and just a powerful example of bringing these artifacts to life by connecting them to the humans behind them. Similarly, here's a little yawl boat, again in decent condition, but not particularly fancy or important in and of itself from construction or design. But again, the story is that this is the yawl boat that was part of the Albatross, used by the Albatross. And Albatross, of course, is the vessel that was made famous in the movie White Squall. It's a tragic story. The boat rolled over in a storm and several members of the crew were lost, including the captain's wife. But those who survived were able to get aboard the yawl boat and ultimately were rescued. Again, another good example. This is a little knockabout sloop designed by a guy named Shiverick. And again, it's fairly typical of the period. It's in good condition. It's well maintained, but not, it doesn't have a pedigree of racing or voyaging or exploration necessarily. But the story behind this boat is that it was actually owned and sailed by Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And the story is that he was at the time Secretary of the Navy. He purchased the boat. He sent a destroyer up, I think, to Marblehead to pick up the boat. They put it on the deck. They took it up to Campobello Island, and he and his family enjoyed sailing on the vessel during the summer season up at Campobello. And in fact, it was after one of those summer seasons that he was afflicted with polio and spent the rest of his life wheelchair bound. Another interesting aspect is this vessel was on display in the exhibit, and we were able to borrow from the Smithsonian Museum one of Roosevelt's wheelchairs. And so again, our ability to combine objects and artifacts to tell more complete, well-rounded stories is something that we can explore further as we endeavor to get more of these small boats out on public display. Next up is this funny looking boat. This boat was actually designed by Bruce Kirby, who was well known and renowned for also designing the laser sailboat, one of the most successful one design classes ever. This boat was purpose-built, designed and purpose-built for a fellow named Dwight Collins, who was, I believe he was a Marine, an ex-Marine or a retired Marine, and he had a desire to try to pedal across the Atlantic. And so we have just this sort of funny snapshot of the pedal mechanism that he used to propel this vessel all the way across the Atlantic Ocean. So again, stories of perseverance, of triumph, of adventure, of resiliency, all are manifest in this small boat collection. So the Rossi Mill across the street, we're looking at the kind of southwest corner of the mill building, and we're looking at converting about 30,000 square feet of that space into an exhibition hall for the watercraft collection. So you may recall that the Collins Gallery was about 5,000 square feet. This would be 6 times that space. And the current plan envisions a pedestrian entrance, both a staircase and an ADA elevator that would get us up into the Rossi Mill. The Rossi Mill is kind of built on a funny grade. You can see moving left to right, the ground kind of raises up. And so there's a basement level, and then there's what looks like a second floor is really the first floor. So the idea is to get people up into that first floor area and be able to experience the watercraft collection exhibited writ large. We're still in the conversation, design, exploration phase in really fleshing out how we want to exhibit these boats, how many of these boats we want to exhibit, how we want to organize them. Is it by age or era? Is it by vessel type? Is it by designer builder? Is it by geography? Or is it by story? Is it about, either fishing or racing or quest for speed or commerce, or, how do we want to do this? And so the nice thing is it's a huge space, and it allows us to contemplate a lot of different concepts of how we want to organize them. One of the things that is that is also important is the fascination or the awe of walking into the current storage area and just seeing like that Raiders of the Lost Ark warehouse just jammed full of boats, and it immediately draws people in. They want to know what's around the corner, what's that boat over there, oh my gosh, what's that further in. So we want to keep that kind of massed warehouse feel and give people that opportunity for exploration. But at the same time, we want to have some highly curated boats where storytelling can take place. And that's what this little image here, the boats outlined in green, show sort of a less dense zone where highly curated story boats or hero boats can be revealed, surrounded by kind of the massed collection up on shelves. One of the other ambitions for this project is to have kind of a flex space. So maybe a zone in the middle of the exhibit hall where we can have boats on rollers and kind of push them aside and create a public space that could be for book talks or lectures or movies or a TSCA conference or a boat building demonstration perhaps. But the idea is to have it be both a community and public space, but also potentially a revenue space co-located within this exhibition hall. Some of you may be aware as well of the work that's been ongoing to digitize this collection. Clearly, most of these boats, especially the older ones, were sort of hand-built one-offs, no plans, built by feel. So what we've been doing is we've been moving the boats around and using photogrammetry to create three-dimensional digital files of the boats. And then those files can be used to create lofting plans, lines plans. We're moving forward to move away from cameras onto laser scanning. But the idea is that it will give us a proper 3D document of each of these vessels, or most of these vessels, from which lines can be taken, from which builders in the future could make reproductions or replicas of these vessels. But there's also an idea that maybe we can hook this up to digital printers, 3D printers, and visitors into the Watercraft Hall exhibit can select from a half a dozen different vessel types and print out a little keepsake model to take home with them. I talked a little bit about hero boats or story boats. Again, the idea is that the vessels illuminated or highlighted with green, which I hope you can see, would be kind of the highly curated boats surrounded by the massed warehouse of boats. And one of the visions is we can do light and sound shows. So maybe we have a half a dozen of these, and they're programmed that so every 30 minutes a different one is kind of activated or animated. And draws you deeper into this vast space to really explore the collection, just a different version or perspective of what that might look like. And then just a few kind of really rough renderings or sketches that are imagining what it might be like to walk into the building through the ticketing area, come around the corner, you see a story boat sort of highly curated, you see mast boats up on the racks. You see maybe some graphics or some videos. Again, boats suspended from the ceiling, some highly curated, some less so. And then this is just a version showing maybe a public space gathering, people seated for a conference or a luncheon or a table. So now, if the technology gods are in my favor, I'm going to just run a little, an animated video, kind of a fly-through video of what conceptually it might be like to visit this new watercraft hall at Mystic Seaport. I apologize, there's no audio for this one, but I do have a video at the very end that is that's got audio for you. So again, massed boats on racks, intermixed with some highly curated, highly interpreted boats. You do begin to get a sense of scale of this space. 35,000 square feet is quite a large exhibition hall for any museum. Again, storyboat there front and center, curated vessels intermixed with other vessels on rack storage. The mill building currently has sort of two different sections, each about 15,000 square feet. One is a flat roof, sort of high span space. The other is the traditional factory sawtooth roof. Lots of interesting conversations about projecting video on the inside faces of the sawtooth roof as people walk through this exhibition. And then getting ready to exit back out through that ticketing foyer. And of course, what we really want to do is link that experience in the Rossi Mill back across the street to what really happens, actually, literally, not virtually, authentically happens on the Mystic River at the boat livery, which is getting people in small boats to go have their own maritime experience in the real world, tactile, tangible, inspirational. Many of you probably are familiar with the Sandy Ford. Pictured here, which is a real crowd favorite, and all sorts of different vessels at the boathouse. And one of the ideas that we are really trying to model and test and experiment is this notion of connecting the physical collection, which is kind of in stasis and a 3D encyclopedia of watercraft, to the living collection, many of which are reproduction boats over in the boat livery. And one of the quotations that we've been testing out with potential sponsors, supporters, enthusiasts is from John Gardner himself, something along the lines of, we need to trust youth, we need to give them room, we need to permit them to develop as whole persons, we need to ask of them but set no limit in our asking, and they will rebuild the world. And that was just one of many great Gardner quotes that speaks to the power, if not indeed the importance, of putting people in boats on the water, be that the ocean, the river, the pond, the lake. We talk a lot about here at Mystic Seaport Museum, some of life's most important lessons being learned at sea. And those are lessons of independence and resilience and fortitude and courage and self-reliance and individual accountability. And we feel that that's really an important mission and an important service and an important aspect and a really important reason why we have collected all these 550 odd boats. Kind of getting toward the tail end here. Another topic that I wanted to touch on, which may not resonate with some of you traditionalists, but our collection is really strong through the 1800s into the first part of the 20th century, 1930, 40, 50, but not so strong since then. And 1950 may seem like just yesterday, but it's quite a while ago. So one of the things that Quentin Snedeker, who, as I think you all know, has been the director of the DuPont Preservation Shipyard, literally wrote the book on large vessel conservation, wooden boat conservation. He is now the senior curator for the small craft collection, and he is really interested in what I call collecting forward, but essentially augmenting the collection and bringing it more into the modern era. Both because vessels that we take for granted today may be scarce and rare 50 years from now, but also we need to be relevant to a contemporary generation and a generation in the future. And so there's very much a conversation going on. What are boats that seem ubiquitous today that might be rare 50 years from now? What are boats that are in use today that might disappear that we want to have and be able to remember and talk about? And so one of the most recent acquisitions was an unlimited hydroplane, one of several Miss Budweiser Grand Prix racers. And another recent acquisition is this little submersible. And some people have seen this little submersible down in the shipyard at Mystic Seaport and say, oh my gosh, Chris, what's going on? You all have lost your way. Why are you collecting submarines now? Well, submarines are vessels. Submarines have tales to tell. And in fact, it's been, I think, just about a century since Beebe first went down in his bathysphere off of Bermuda. So there's 100 years of maritime history that is not represented here at Mystic Seaport and in our collections, that embodies fascinating stories, again, of adventure and trial and overcoming adversity and exploration. And we feel that it's really, frankly, consistent with our longstanding and traditional mission to be collecting in this area. One of the things we're really talking a lot about and guarding against is getting too close to or crossing over the line into the realm of maritime science and the realms of that aquariums and others are involved with. But we do think we can tell the human stories of the people who are doing the scientific work, the ocean conservation work. And when you begin to expand your thinking in that regard, there are tremendous stories about contemporary aquaculture and wind farms and other deep sea mining that are human stories about our interactions with the sea. But before I get too far down that train of thought, I thought maybe what I could do next is play a short video that is our first video that we're, again, looking for feedback on, trying to socialize some of these concepts with potential museum, not potential museum friends, but museum friends and potential supporters for this project. And so this is a little 3-minute video that tries to tie together all the things that we talked about: the depth and breadth of the collection, its import, our desire to continue to bring it forward into the modern era, our desire to get it on display for the public, our desire to tell the important human stories that these vessels represent. And so again, if all goes according to plan, we'll have another quick little video show here.
The largest maritime museum in America is about to turn 100. And today, we are asking for your support in our effort to open a new public facility with a collection of historic American watercraft that we have been assembling since the day we opened our doors. This museum holds over 550 iconic boats, along with an unparalleled collection of maritime artifacts. These treasures capture the progression of American nautical innovation, and they are being made public for the very first time as part of a new permanent exhibition, which we are calling the American Watercraft Collection. The American Watercraft Collection will be showcased inside Watercraft Hall on our expanding campus in the historic Rossi Velvet Mill, where we'll be converting over 35,000 square feet to house the historical vessels, develop new educational programs, and create flexible community space for lectures and presentations. Built in 1898 to attract manufacturing to the area, the Rossi Mill was the largest employer in Mystic during the early 20th century. We acquired the building over 20 years ago for our research center and archives collection, and this reimagined space is phase 2 of our plan to expand, conserve, and develop this historic landmark. The boats in this collection tell stories of hope, exploration, innovation, survival, and adventure. From a Cuban fishing boat that carried 2 separate groups of immigrants to the United States in a single voyage, to a human-powered craft that pedaled across the Atlantic in 40 days, to FDR's own Knockabout sloop, which he sailed on the last day that he was able to walk on his own. Simply put, this is the largest, most diverse collection of historic vessels in the world, and their combined history is the embodiment of the last 2 American centuries. The American Watercraft Collection is the museum's next natural step in our pursuit of building an experiential gateway to American history. Alongside the state-of-the-art Thompson Exhibition Building and the world-class Delamar Mystic Hotel, the American Watercraft Collection dramatically expands the accessible footprint of the museum, opening up these vessels and their stories to the world. At Mystic, we like to say that we are rooted in history, but never stuck in the past. We are moving forward, developing and growing as an institution of international significance, and our work is far from finished. We believe that this new initiative is a unique opportunity to share the stories of our iconic 550 American watercraft with the world, and we are seeking to raise $15 million to make this a reality. We invite you to invest in our success and to help us bring these maritime stories forward for the next 100 years.
And that pretty much concludes what I had intended to share with you all. I would love to have a conversation now if there are questions, try to answer those. And again, so for all of us in the fundraising business, right, this is sort of the quiet phase of a larger capital campaign. And what we're really interested in is feedback, constructive criticism, advice, things that resonate, things that don't resonate, things that you might find shocking or unpalatable, things that you think are really great, cool. Really looking to engage and try to figure out how to position this as in the best way that we can. So I'm going to stop sharing, I think, and then see, I think there's one in chat, and we'll go from there. So question, will shipwrecks be included in Watercraft Hall? So I don't know if you mean literally, will we bring the remains of wrecked vessels into the collection, or figuratively, will we have stories related to vessels that were wrecked? I think that's perhaps a more likely scenario, and I think you can look to the yawl boat from the Albatross as kind of a concrete representation. The Albatross was lost, unfortunately. The yawl boat remains, and so that is the evidence of the bigger vessel and the connection to that story.
There's got to be 1,000 questions out there. Come on, guys.
Well,
when, I remember a comment that John Gardner had said back in the 70s, that if they had made fiberglass boats in the 30s, we'd be collecting them. So that's sort of what you see as the pickup for the next 50 years.
Yeah, right. And so, material technology is changing and continues to evolve. We have some fiberglass boats in the collection. We have some aluminum boats in the collection. We don't yet have any foiling boats in the collection. And then maybe as another good example, there is a family up in Rhode Island that runs the last trap fishing business, I believe, on the eastern seaboard, certainly in New England, whereby they go out each year and they set up a physical structure, a fish trap, and then they go out with a large boat and a couple of seine boats in tow, and they harvest the fish out of the trap. And that's, again, that's an industry that is largely dead, but for this one family. And so the question is, would we want one of the seine boats? They're really sort of industrial looking aluminum motor skiffs. And the reality is, if this family decides to give up the Ghost, that industry is essentially over. It might be worthwhile to have one of those seine boats in our collection, so we can keep that story alive for next generation.
I think that guys, you can unmute so you can ask a question instead of typing it. We do have a few other questions that have come in the chat.
Yeah, I see. How big is Rossi Mill? And if you use 30,000 to 35 for display, awesome. Where will the boats not on display be stored? So good question. We're doing a lot of modeling and trying to figure out so 550 boats, we probably won't have all 550 on public display. We think we can probably have about half of those. So maybe the easiest way to think about this is the Rossi Mill is roughly 4 acres. 1 acre we converted 20 years ago for the Collections Research Center. That's where all of the non-boat reserve collections are held and where all the scholars and curators reside. Watercraft Hall will be roughly another acre converted into public exhibition space to pull forward, let's say for the sake of argument, half the collection. The last 2 acres remain on the back side of the mill, yet undeveloped. And so that's largely where reserve collection for small boats will remain. Pardon me.
Christopher has a comment in chat. Christopher Stevenson.
Will the new collection be part of the volunteering program, i.e. new volunteers to assist with tours, etc.? Yeah, I suspect so, right? So Mystic Seaport has been blessed to always have a very large and enthusiastic volunteer cadre. We have been using volunteer docents in exhibition spaces pretty much, I would say, since COVID. It was not something we had done pre-COVID. We had relied on paid professional staff, but more and more those are roles that volunteers are willing to train up to undertake. So I imagine that will be a model within the new Watercraft Hall and small boat exhibition. Yes. In fact, the photogrammetry that I talked about is largely being done at present by a cohort of volunteers who have been trained up in the technology and are documenting the collection digitally. Anything else anybody's curious about?
In your campaign video, you mentioned 15 million. Is that enough?
Well, we think so. That right now, that covers the hard costs of building out the space, about 2 million allocated for exhibition design and production, about 3 million to augment endowment to help offset the overhead operating cost of the new space. So really the mystery in there is the exhibit cost. We have been engaging with some pretty creative exhibit design firms, and there's a lot of conversation trending towards some sort of an immersive experience, meaning a technology experience, and that could blow the budget out of the water. So that would be kind of the bogey in there. But right now we feel that 15 is an operable number with a little wiggle room. Yes.
I remember, and the other question is, I remember, and I think Paul Diorsi's on this call and he might chime in. I remember when they opened up the new facility for Independent Seaport in Philadelphia, and they relied on a lot of then state-of-the-art interactive technologies, but it became a challenge maintaining those on the exhibit floor. Are you budgeting for ongoing repair, maintenance, replacement, the daily care and feeding of whatever these immersive experiences might be?
Yeah, precisely. We've had exactly the same experience. So we have our little replica of the Brant Point Lighthouse has, I think, 3 flat panel display screens in it that run a different suite of videos about lighthouses. And I don't know, don't hold me to this, but I feel like we replace those about every 3rd year, and it's, 18 grand. So yeah, when we talk about trying to include some endowment funds within this campaign, it's precisely so that we can try to offset operating expenses moving forward. The other conversation that happens here in earnest is a camp, if you will, or a school of thought that, we really pride ourselves on the authentic and the real experience. And we have the boat livery and the sailing center and Schooner Brilliant. And why do we want to have somebody be in a virtual, schooner experience in the Watercraft Hall when they can come across the street and hop on Brilliant and go sailing? So there's a little bit of tension there. And we're trying to kind of balance that and be practical about it. Let's see, there was a question about timeline. That's a pretty common question. as soon as we can, right, is the kind of cheeky answer. The board is requiring that we have 5.7 million in hand before construction starts. We have cash and pledges totaling 4.5 million committed to date, so we're close to that start time. Once we start, the estimated for kind of the raw construction is about 18 months to have a facility that could be opened with boats in it. Again, the bogey or the delta in there is the exhibition itself and how ambitious we are around that. That could add another 6 to 12 months to a total construction timeline. I see a question. I assume the main floor is above the flood zone elevation. So what is the plan for the lower level? Yeah, so the grade and elevation rises as we go across Route 27 and head to the east. So much of the mill is, I believe, technically out of the flood zone, but that lower basement area is subject to some water issues with high tides and torrential rains. So right now that lower level is used for storage of some objects and artifacts that aren't super sensitive to moisture and humidity. And that will probably continue. I don't think it will ever be converted to any sort of a public space or open to the public space. Let's see, will you be looking at offering overnight space for organizations to stay in the facility? It's a good question, right? So clearly we've talked about it would be fun to have Conrad campers who are here for their week-long summer experience spend the night in the Watercraft Hall, especially if there was a movie or a film or an experience that could be presented to them there. I'm not aware that discussion has ranged into adults or other visitors. But again, one of the things that's resonating a lot with the folks we're talking to is the notion that this can be a flexible space and that over time its use and purpose can evolve. It's principally meant to be showing and exhibiting the small boats and the engines, but it's a big enough space that we can flex around a little bit, and maybe we install some other aspect of exhibiting around there to reveal maritime stories. One of the things we're talking about in earnest is there are still some tremendous private collections of small craft out there, and there are still some gaps in our own collections. So would we go to, say, the Clayton Museum and ask to borrow a half a dozen mahogany runabouts, because we really only have, I think, 2 or 3? Would we go to a private collector? There's a fellow who owns a race boat that was owned by Guy Lombardo. The name of the boat is Tempo, I believe. And we have some tremendous photographs of the vessel in our Rosenfeld collection. It would be fun to get Tempo here and put it on display and tell that story and have some Rosenfeld photos on there. Let's see, I'm getting a next question about not seeing much display of sail rigs. Yeah, so for most all of the sailboats we have the rig, and in many instances we have the sails. In the reserve storage, however, there isn't height enough to have them shown as such. Half of this space, the quote flat root section, I think we have about 30 or 35 feet of clear span space. So yes, some of the sailboats could be displayed with rig in and sail up. And so again, that I leave that to the curators to determine what boats will be shown and how. But you very definitely, and again, once you get sort of cross that threshold, then could you project interesting video onto the sails of the small boats? And you could have whether it's let's say it's a Thistle race boat there with the rig in and the sails up, and maybe we have some archival footage of Thistles being raced or sailed somewhere on Long Island Sound or around the country. Do you project that onto the sail of the actual boat? So clearly something we're thinking about. We're not, or I guess we're saying we're agnostic. We like all boats: sailboats, rowboats, pedal boats, paddle boats, surf boats, stand-up boats. Let's see, one of your photos shows a kid touching a boat. Obviously a great way to enhance the visitor experience, but how do you manage conservation concerns? Yep, good question, something we talk a lot about. Broadly stated, these small boats are pretty robust in terms of artifacts. There are some that are in pretty tender condition. There's a little solo paddle canoe, I think, that was built by Rushton that is just an absolute work of art, but really quite delicate. So that's one where we wouldn't want it manhandled, if you will, by the visitor. But a boat like the Ana Luisa, a rough-built Cuban fishing boat, pretty sturdy. I think, touching it doesn't cause us a lot of consternation. Sort of along the same vein is, I'll call it HVAC, but climate control in the building. Temperature, less a concern, moisture, a bigger concern. Do we want to try to climate control the entire space? And if so, to what standards? So we've been doing a lot of research in this area, talked to a lot of other organizations and museums looking for best practice and standard. What is the ideal humidity? What is the ideal temperature? How do we keep it hopefully comfortable for visitors into the space, but not overdo it? Let's see, another question. Are you limiting the collection to USA construction? Yes, but it's not a hard and fast rule. So for example, again, Ana Luisa, Cuban built vessel. However, we felt the story was as much an American story as a Cuban story. And so we acquired that and brought it into our collection. So I think that's, I don't, again, leave that to the curators, but if there were a foreign built vessel that had an important connection to America's maritime story, certainly we would consider bringing that into the collection. And again, it's, don't repeat this to the curators, because they would love to collect every kind of vessel, every type of vessel, one of every vessel ever built. From my side of the table, the promise of this space, and as large as it is maybe Mystic Seaport doesn't have to own every vessel ever built, because we can borrow in and take on loan from other institutions to, so again, we have quite a few canoes and guide boats and things like that, but maybe there are better out there, and rather than acquire them ourselves, we borrow or loan them in from another institution, which is very common throughout the museum world with things like paintings and sculpture and objects like that. Perhaps a little less common with these large artifacts like boats and engines. Let's see, can I ask a question regarding a friendship sloop that could be part of a living sailing vessel or the seaport, somewhat similar to the Brilliant? You can ask a question, sure, yeah, absolutely. I may not have a definitive answer, but either elaborate in chat or hop off mute and ask.
Yeah, this is Christopher asking that question. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Yeah, so I know I'm on West Coast. I'm an outlier here on the West Coast in California, and I was discovered and stumbled upon a friendship sloop that's for sale here. It's a Paul Luke built friendship sloop, 1947, and I've just had this idea about, a little bit of an out there idea about, not wanting to let that boat just go to ruin, because no one in the West Coast really cares as much about wooden boats as people on the East Coast do. And so I just thought maybe there's a way to collaborate with some folks like you guys to have a vessel like that become part of your collection and be, part of a living collection where a group of people who take care, people who volunteers and others, the people who are knowledgeable of protection and maintenance of wooden boat would be able to have that be part of the collection, and it goes out to sail. It's in good sailing shape, actually.
Sure. So again, the definitive answer would have to come from Chris Gasorik, who is our vice president in charge of the shipyard and watercraft. Mm-hmm. And I can get you in touch with him if you want to email me after the fact. Practical reality is we get offers of vessels all the time. Right. We receive them in sort of three different capacities. One, right. We receive it and we sell it and we put the proceeds back into the collection. Sure. Two, we receive it and hold it and then sell it. Three, we receive it and accession it into the permanent collection. Sure. Some of the boats that we receive and keep for the 3-year hold period, we employ in the charter business in inactive use. So there's some precedent for receiving a donated vessel and then using it in program some way. We do have a Stella A, which is a friendship sloop here at the museum currently in the collection that is slowly being restored by some volunteers and staff. So that's an answer. It's not definitive, but Chris Historic is the place to start.
Okay, good. No, that's an excellent answer. And
I have another text question, and then Sam, I saw your hand go up. The text question is, I'd really like a ride in a Hickman sea sled. What are the odds? Or maybe the old replica. So a good question. I don't know what the odds are, but I do know that there is one out there that is still in use and afloat, and it has been here at the museum on display. I don't know what the fate of that boat would be ultimately, but maybe with a little research and effort, we could put you on the water in a Hickman sea sled. Sure. Sam, you had your hand up?
Yeah, I was trying to remember your video, how you were branding this. Were you calling it the National Watercraft Collection?
We're not. No, we thought that was perhaps too bold a statement to make. So right now, the working language is that I call it Rossi Mill Phase 2 Watercraft Hall. So we're calling that building envelope, if you will, or the display space, Watercraft Hall. And right now we're calling the first exhibit the quote American Watercraft Collection.
So, yeah, and thank you, Paul. I know the National Collection's at the Smithsonian, but I was wondering if Mystic was stepping on the Smithsonian's toes. Question is, I used to be curator, up on Penobscot Bay, and I'm now in Oregon, and I'm wondering if in your displays you'll also be representing anything from the West Coast, like the Mackenzie River dories here in Oregon that are used for fly fishing and are built out of wood.
Yeah, again, a question more appropriate for the curatorial team, but I will tell you, we sort of put a stake in the ground that we wanted to be national in scope and tell stories about all of America's maritime activities. The practical reality is it's beyond our capacity to collect from every different region, but certainly borrowing, again, taking material on loan to tell those stories. I've been involved in a conversation with a fellow out on the Great Lakes who has a tremendous collection of ship models related to Great Lakes shipping, paintings related to Great Lakes shipping. It's an area within our collections that is underrepresented. So there's a possibility that collection would come to us and we would do a Great Lakes exhibit. So we're certainly open to the conversation. I've seen a chat question, what type of amenities? I see you have catering ideas. That will mean you have to have certified commercial kitchens, etc. Rent, use houses, as well as feeding day-to-day guests. Yep, so astute and good question. The Delamar Hotel project that was referenced in the video is being developed by Greenwich Hospitality Group. It'll be kind of co-located here at the north end of Mystic Seaport. It's a long-term ground lease, but they will build and own the capital asset and run the restaurant business. They will have some prep kitchen and catering kitchen licensed, state licensed. When somebody asked me about the size of the mill, and we talked about sort of 4 acres, the 2 acres that are undeveloped, some of that space will be given over to that catering support for the restaurant and hotel, which then would give us the opportunity to have access to catering within the watercraft exhibition area. And again, a big discussion ongoing is food and drink in proximity to the artifacts, right? How do we manage that, navigate that, and be careful and thoughtful about it so that we're doing the best job and sticking to museum best practice, but hopefully are able to have that flex space again, maybe where the objects are pushed out of the way, and that food and drink can happen in that sort of defined area. So right now, beyond that, there'll be ticketing, there'll be washrooms, there'll be some ADA accommodations. We don't know if there will be a coffee shop, book shop, gift shop in the new space, but we are considering, some of you may know the whole story, but about the Olin Stevens Cruising Club of America reading room, which used to be in the Blunt White Library. when the Blunt and White Library came down, that reading room went away. There's some thought that maybe we recreate a public reading room in this space outside of the ticketed envelope where anybody can pop in and thumb through a book and sit down and relax and enjoy the sun coming in through the windows, that sort of thing. I feel like we're kind of coming up on an hour. If there are a few more last questions, I'm happy to take them. Otherwise, I can take my leave with gratitude and say thank you so much for signing on and listening to me tonight.
Well, it's a pretty good meeting all the way around. I appreciate it. And thank you from all of us at the Traditional Small Craft Association and to the 42 people who joined us from around the nation. It's been a great
Yeah,
time.
no, thanks very much. And I'm not here to ask you for money, but I am here to ask you, if you believe in this, to be ambassadors and advocates and champions for the cause. And so please spread the word. And I don't know how many different individual chapters are represented here, but again, I'd be happy to reprise this or do a modified version of this kind of one at a time to the different chapter groups, if that would be helpful or beneficial. And then last, I would say, if you ever find your way, some of you I think are on the East Coast, but for those of you who are not, if you find your way up here to Mystic Seaport, let me know. I'd love to meet you and give you a walk around.
Now there's a plan.
Yeah,
We'll do that for the, where's Bill Rutherford? Is he still online? Put him on the program for the next small craft workshop.
Sure. Thank you. I've seen some chat come through saying thank you, great presentation, very good, etc. I appreciate it. Thanks so much. This is my first run through of this slide deck. Some of these concepts are really quite new, so you all are getting a first look. And again, if there's over time, if you have other thoughts or feedback, please don't hesitate to pass it along.
Great time and a great night. Christopher, thank you very, very much.
My pleasure. Thanks for the invitation and the opportunity, and hope we'll see you on the water.
That would be great.
Cool. Yeah.
Good. All righty. Good night, all.
Okay,
Good night.
let's see.